Hello, team. It's me again, Jonathan MS Pierce at ATP Geopolitics with the Ukraine War news update for the 19th of May, 2023. Let's go to where we normally start, the Ukrainian General Staff figures for the Russian losses of the day before, all the usual caveats. Inaccurate propaganda. I find these indicatively useful and much more accurate than critics give them credit for being. Indeed, we are seeing fairly similar numbers in terms of liquidated personnel. A little bit of an uptick actually from yesterday, getting back up into the high 600s. So that suggests that possibly around Bakhmut, there's quite a bit of activity both north and south of the town that is leading to deaths or captures. It's always difficult to know exactly how they calculate these liquidated personnel figures. What it means is it definitely just killed, or is it taken out of action and captured POWs part of this? But assuming it's just KIA, then I think you can conclude that the Russians have lost a fair number north and south of Bakhmut. 4 tanks and 4 APCs. Of course, when I say the Russians lost that, it's not to say that the Ukrainians magically don't lose troops. Bakhmut has been really highly attritional for the Ukrainians. It's just that those figures are worse for the Russians. And indeed, some of the figures coming out yesterday from primary sources on the line, as I say, south and north of Bakhmut are saying, we did this, we didn't lose any, they lost a big bunch, and you start trying to work out these numbers and see that actually things weren't great for the Russians. But I think in the city itself and the town itself, in that urban warfare, that's attritional for both sides. 12 artillery systems, 1 MLRS. The Russians have lost a huge number of artillery pieces over the last week. That's dipped down to 12, which is still a significant number. 1 multiple launch rocket system, 1 anti-aircraft warfare system. Don't know what type that is. Well, I say I don't know what type. It could be a bit of video footage I'm just about to show you. It could be a book, that one. But it's hard to know whether the video that comes out is really from the day before, whether it's some 3 or 4 days before. Who knows? But to continue, 10 drones, 21 cruise missiles. There's just been a whole number last few nights. Every night there seems to be cruise missiles and drones. Usually these refer not to the night before, but the night before that, because of the timing that these statistics are tallied. 10 vehicles and fuel tanks, 1 piece of special equipment. I'll show you what that could be. We are seeing coming up to 1 piece per day, because the average has been shifted due to some days there being 7, other days there's being 3, 4, but quite often over 2 pieces of special equipment lost. That could be electronic warfare, video surveillance, radar systems, demining excavator equipment, so on and so forth. Right, last night, 16 Shahed drones and 3 Caliber missiles were shot down by Ukrainian air defense. 3 out of 6 cruise missiles were shot down, 16 out of 22 drones. So that means that 6 drones and 3 cruise missiles got through. Due to the strikes, there was significant damage to the industrial facility in Kryvyi Rih. 2 people were injured. In addition, in the Lviv region, damage to critical infrastructure facility was recorded. So Lviv is right in the west of the country. Kryvyi Rih, sort of in the middle of the kind of center to the east. So a bit of a spread of attacks there. I think when I was talking yesterday in my extra video about can we trust the Ukrainian figures, when they said they shot down 100% of 18 cruise missiles, is that trustworthy? And then I was talking about how actually the Ukrainians have got far more motivation to tell the truth than the Russians do, and talked about the justification for that conclusion. And when you then hear, days after that, 16 out of 22, 3 out of 6, that's a 50% cruise missile interception rate, which isn't brilliant. Then I think that shows you that actually there's a bit of variation in their stats, and that leads one to think they are slightly more accurate than just always 100%, 95%, and so on and so forth. So is that them just being clever with their communication? I don't know. When Russia seemed to attack other places outside of Kyiv, because I think Kyiv had 100% takedown from last night. And when they hit other places where there's less of a air defense network set up, they have more success, the Russians, and that's why I was saying they should probably give up on attacking Kyiv, because as the capital city, that will have the best air defenses, and they're just going to be using up their already low stockpile on air defenses. Right, let's just try and put some meat on the bones for those figures. Just a little bit of a dance there for you, just in case you want some music. This is just another montage of first-person view drones, and this is a montage I haven't seen. In other words, there's a whole load more uh, equipment that's being taken out by these incredibly cost-effective FPV first-person view drones that the Ukrainians are utilizing, putting warheads on RPG-7 warheads. There's a self-propelled howitzer being taken out. You've got all sorts of equipment that gets taken out by these relatively easily. I assume most of these are rendered inoperable. I can't verify that for sure, because with these drones, there isn't often a spotter drone. These do all the stuff themselves. They go and find the target, and then they hit the target. And so, there isn't always another drone looking over to see what the damage was. But you can rest assured that certainly vehicles like trucks and other such vehicles won't be going anywhere soon after being hit by these. These are potent and incredibly cost effective, and it appears quite easy to use. Now, this Tendar here says compilation of Ukrainian DIY suicide drones. What makes these drones impressive is their cost efficiency. Most of them do not cost more than $2,000, but they neutralize Russian vehicles like the self-propelled howitzer there that costs $2 million. Thousands of those birds are waiting. And in fact, we have a reply to this. Actually, the FPV drones cost between $350 and $450 a piece. Here's a great article about a group of Ukrainian engineers that make 1,000 of these a month. So these are indigenously made, and then they whack the RPG-7 warheads or similar onto them, and hey presto, you've got a really deadly piece of kit for not much expenditure at all. They are just becoming more and more useful. In fact, here we have more of these types of drones, but being used specifically to take out. This is an operation to destroy Russian video surveillance systems, electronic intelligence, and warfare equipment. We'll just check this out. So this will be the special equipment at the end of that list. There was one taken out yesterday, as according to that list, but they are losing kit like this on a daily basis, masked with video surveillance. I've seen cameras on smaller masts in tree lines. Not this one. This is a different one. This is a taller mast. And yeah, they're just taking out kit like this with these FPV drones really effectively. We are starting to see a consistent loss to the Russians of this on a daily basis, and that's going to affect their capability going forward. Yes, so there you go. Okay, you've seen enough of that. That's things on Mars getting blown up. Here is the book I was telling you about. We'll pause that, expand it, had to remute it because, and here we have a book system. You can see it cooking off there as its munitions are firing off into the field. So that is an air defense system, and that's going to be really useful for the Ukrainians to take out those on a consistent basis. Of course, it's difficult to know how many systems the Ukrainians themselves lose. Of course, they're always losing things too. Here is what's left of a BMP. I mean, there's virtually nothing left of it. It's a Ukrainian one. What's interesting about this is how far behind the lines this was taken out. So that is, if you can remember the front lines, we got Vuhledar here, Novomykhailivka, Mykilska, Pavlivka. This is right back behind Vodyane, in the middle of rural areas that is not particularly on the front line, and yet there you have a Ukrainian BMP infantry fighting vehicle get taken out. So yeah, both sides are losing stuff. It's just the ratio between the losses of the Russians and Ukrainians. I was looking at the Oryx data daily, well, the data summaries that come out every 2 days, and I think it was something like 90 something pieces of Russian equipment, 46 pieces of Ukrainian equipment, and that's a 2-to-1 ratio. Actually, that's quite significant because the ratio was easily 3-to-1, between 3 and 4-to-1 through much of this war. That's how much equipment the Russians have lost. I guess as we're moving towards the end of offensive, periods for the Russians, and they're arguably running out of huge amounts of equipment, we are going to see less equipment being lost by the Russians, and we're going to see more equipment being lost by the Ukrainians as they are probing, as they're getting ready for their counteroffensive, and they have a large pool of equipment, in different places around and behind the front lines. You will see an uptick in Ukrainian equipment lost. And that's possibly being reflected in Oryx's data there, which is still 2-1 in favor of the Ukrainians. Right, this is hugely significant. Like, this is a huge. There are two huge bits of news today, and this is one of them. So, from the CNN article, it's possible to assume that the Patriot was involved in a recent string of air crashes in the Bryansk region. Defense officials and congressional staffers told that Ukraine has, in recent weeks, used Patriot to shoot down at least one far-away Russian fighter. The Russian planes the Patriot targeted were on a bombing run to fire missiles against Ukrainian targets, US officials said, which Russia has been doing throughout the past year to maximize civilian casualties. The article does not specifically say that Patriot shot down Russian jets in the Bryansk region, but there is no other known event from the past week that would fit the description given in the article. So we had a helicopter go down in Crimea that seemed not to be, couldn't have been, I don't think, a Patriot system. And then the only other ones lost were the 5 aircraft lost in like 20 minutes in Bryansk region in Russia. And there's been all the speculation about was it Russian? I mean, the prevailing conclusion was that it was Russian air defense systems misfiring, because it couldn't be explained by man pads, really. You're not going to have sabotage units in Bryansk itself, like Ukrainian units operating man pads, not being able to take 5 in that time frame. And so you're trying to work out what's the most plausible explanation. Well, it turns out that actually it seems that the Patriot system can reach there. I mean, this is the power of the Patriot system. And there seems to be this idea that one jet was taken down. I mean, that's what they're admitting. Well, if 5 went down at the same time, you can probably assume that the Patriot took out every single one of those. Unless that triggered off Russian air defense to do some crazy stuff themselves. So bit by bit, the pieces, which when put together make quite a lot of sense. The Bryansk incident might have involved Patriot missiles, according to CNN. This is from Tendar. At least it would match with the ongoing events and a furious response by Russia to take them out. So this is super important. So another great bit of reasoning that those aircraft were taken out in Bryansk by the Patriot is that suddenly after that, the Patriot system was targeted in Kyiv by Kinzhal missiles. So Russia panicked, were really angry probably, and got their very best missiles and sent them at Kyiv. They wouldn't have done that had Patriot system not taken out those aircraft in Bryansk, arguably. So for me, if I'm weighing up what is the most likely hypothesis for the destruction of those 5 aircraft, 3 helicopters and 2 jets, it's almost certainly Patriot. Actually, I've changed my mind to think it is Ukrainian air defense. I just didn't think they had the range there, but apparently that is not the case. As he continues, at least it will match with the ongoing events and the furious response by Russia to take them out, which, by the way, completely failed. The damage was only minor and the system is fully operational. As I said yesterday, they have already fixed it by all accounts. In fact, some are saying they just need to be fixed with duct tape. Now, there was an explosion there. So whether that was a missile coming down and exploding near the piece of kit and having superficial damage to the kit, that could well be the case, rather than a missile coming down and exploding on the piece of kit, in which case it wouldn't be that easily fixable. So the CNN article says defense officials and congressional staffers told CNN that Ukrainian troops have in recent weeks used the US-made Patriot air defense system to shoot down at least one far-away Russian fighter jet. So 2 jets were taken down and 3 helicopters. Could they have all been taken out by the Patriot? Plausibly, yes. And that is significant because that's going to affect the way that the Russian VKS, the Russian Air Force, is going to be used. It's going to affect their ability to strike the northern area of Ukraine from within Russia. I mean, this is really quite significant. If we go and look at the map, no, that's not the map. This is the map. if we look at the map of Ukraine here, Russia have been using their air force from within the Russian borders. That's quite a confident thing for them to do because they're overly cautious, and they are attacking areas around here, Kharkiv, Chernihiv. So it could be that you're going to stop seeing the air force operate around this region because of the reach of the Patriot air defense systems here, and maybe other systems that they've got in place. It would seem pretty clever to me if the Ukrainians could place air defense systems closer to the border and reach into Russia, which then pushes their air force further and further back. Kharkiv is often hit. That's hit, as we'll see in a second, by S-300s as opposed to air-launched missiles. But yeah, if they could push the Russian air force back, then that would be hugely significant. That's Kryvyi Rih. That's what I was trying to explain where it was. So more to the east and a little bit in the center, but Lviv as well being hit means that there is that spread. Right. Okay, moving on. This afternoon's, as I just mentioned, Russian S-300 missile attack on Kharkiv suburb of Zverkuni killed 52-year-old local resident, injured two other civilians. 2 residential buildings were completely destroyed, 13 more damaged. It was a massive crater. S-300s are pretty devastating when they're used in their ground-to-ground mode, although they're not very accurate. Okay, Russia on fire is an attack on a railway. There are 4 relay cabinets set on fire by a saboteur. That's really useful. I mean, that's quite easy to do and arguably low risk. So yeah, it's great that stuff can happen within the Russian borders. Okay, moving on to bits and pieces. We're just going to talk a little bit about Bakhmut really quickly ahead of the frontline update. So Russians have committed most of their reserves in Bakhmut. Today, Ukraine repelled all Russian attacks in the city, apparently, and advanced half to 1 kilometer on the flanks. Indeed, there's one stretch, a 2-kilometer wide stretch, that they advanced 700 meters just really, really quickly, apparently. There are quite large losses for the Russians in terms of killed in action, wounded, and captured. So the Ukrainians really are doing quite well on the flanks, but in Bakhmut itself, they're almost certainly, I mean, they're effectively not really in the town anymore. I guess they're just hanging on to elements, to buildings in the very southern part of the western district. Here we've got the ISW, George Barros there, saying that the Ukrainian shaping operation, this is a gift of the territorial control changes in Bakhmut area between May the 9th and 18th. So when I have Russian voices on my thread say, these are pitiful gains, it's like they've made 29 square kilometers in really quite a short time. And what have the Russians done over the 1-year period of trying to take Bakhmut? If the Russians had gained that amount of ground in that time, Bakhmut would have fallen ages ago. So, trying to dismiss the Ukrainian advances because that's all you've got is not gonna work really. Assessments based on available combat footage, Ukrainian officials' statements, and Russian military blogger reports. Now, what has also happened is the Ukrainians have opened up a 4th, I would say, front. I think that's a bit possibly a bit too grandiose. There are 4 areas where they seem to be attacking. One is south in Klishchivka, one is just north of Kromova, and then a little bit further north of there as well, near Orikovo-Vasilivka. And then they have made some gains in Sakyo-Vanseti up here. Now they've pushed the Russians out of trench lines there with artillery barrages. I think they sent and this is the idea that I don't think these are I do think these are localized attacks using very few resources. So the report was, I think it was reporting in Ukraine, talking about how they attacked here with just 1 tank. This is no big counteroffensive, but they're able to make gains with really small amounts of tanks and troops and mechanized equipment. You would expect with a big counteroffensive, a whole battalion's worth, etc., etc. These are just isolated, small, localized counterattacks that are doing the business, which then indicates how much Russia have culminated. This is a textbook culmination. They are trying to pull reserves in from other places, but they're pulling them from places like Avdiivka. Yes, they're possibly getting some in from Belarus. There's talk about 200 troops and some equipment coming around through Russia and into Luhansk. So there could be some of those troops, but pulling them from Avdiivka and other places then weakens those other places. So it's just Russia are not in a good way, I think, at the moment in terms of their troop concentrations. Right, moving on to military aid and whatnot. Norwegian Defence Minister Bjorn Arild Gram saying during joint, that's my best Norwegian accent, joint press conference with UK counterpart F-16s for Ukraine are not on the agenda and not something he wishes to discuss. All right, calm down. I just don't get what the hang up is with providing combat aircraft. Justin Bronk says in reply, who's a bit of an expert, US approval on the sensitive weapons and sensitive technology transfers requires to make the basic aircraft effective in the threat environment and concerns about vulnerability of maintenance setups on the ground to Russian missile strikes, as I've been saying for months. So he's talking about, why they might not be so up for, letting these F-16s go. However, this is a second big piece of news. Right. So the Yahoo News, Michael Weiss is doing such a good job of covering this for Yahoo News. His articles are brilliant. He's really good and on it. So his scoop for Yahoo News, they've obtained a US Air Force assessment of how 2 Ukrainian pilots did in a 3-week course on F-16s at Morris Air National Guard's base in February and March. Conclusion: it'll take 4 months to train them and not 18 months as the Pentagon has previously said. This is hugely significant because it means actually you can train them relatively quickly. Yes, it's going to be about the logistics and getting hold of the equipment and runways and all these other bits and pieces that are outside just some dude flying a plane. Right? This entails an awful lot to get these F-16s. However, this should facilitate them being delivered. This exchange taking place, or not exchange, this hopefully F-16s being given to Ukraine. Yahoo News has obtained US Air Force assessment of 2 Ukrainian pilots who outperformed stated Pentagon expectations over 2 weeks in a flight simulator at a US airbase. So, of course, this is flight simulators and not flying the real thing. But the document says that basically they've done a really good job. They're able to execute mock attacks based on parameters communicated while they were flying the sim. Successfully land the aircraft from an overhead simulated flameout pattern. This is relatively technical skill that must be continually practiced throughout an F-16 fighter pilot's career, and so on and so forth. So they've done a really good job. The only area for concern was English. The language ability is elsewhere noted as a concern, although the assessors state that there was a noted improvement in English aptitude over the course of 2 weeks for both Ukrainian pilots. That's because they had to use avionics equipment and there's a lot of English, both in the training and in the operation of the aircraft. But of course, that's quite an easy skill to overcome. It's just learn English, get on a Duolingo app or something. Anyway, we're just watching Netflix a lot. So there are fewer and fewer arguments to not give, for example, F-16s to Ukraine. It's getting to a point where surely that's got to happen. And as Michael Weiss says elsewhere, slowly but surely, US officials told slowly but surely it's going to happen. So this is from a CNN article. US officials told CNN that the administration is prepared to approve the export of the jets to Ukraine if that is what allies decide to do with their supply. So this is the US saying we don't have a problem with F-16s going. It's not like there was an issue with export of Leopard 2 tanks, although apparently that wasn't Germany saying that they couldn't export them. Is no one officially asked them. So everyone's saying Germany's not exporting Leopard 2. Germany's not exporting Leopard 2s. And actually the reality, as far as I understand it, is that places like Poland hadn't actually asked them. It's like, yeah, we're still waiting to be asked, by the way. We haven't said no, but we haven't said yes because no one's asked us. Anyway, so that went on for ages and everyone's blaming Germany. And I don't think it was actually Germany's fault, but I could be wrong there. Here, the US has said, yeah, go for it. You can export these, but it looks like they won't be from US stocks. So this is where, the UK, okay, we don't have F-16s, but UK getting together with other nations, Netherlands, and so on, Belgium, to deliver, to try and get these F-16s to the to Ukraine. The New York Times writes that the group of 14 members of the US Congress sent a letter to Joe Biden administration with a request to unblock the supply of F-16 fighter jets to Ukraine without delay. Well, hopefully that's happened. Whether in that letter they were asking for the US to provide the jets themselves, I don't know. It, as this person says, it's the export license, not the actual aircraft itself that needs unblocking. Well, that appears to be fine now. So again, all of these barriers that people have thought were in place are falling away. And, this could happen. It's just frustrating that this didn't happen like 6 months ago, 8 months ago, 12 months ago. Ukraine has successfully used Storm Shadow. This is Ben Wallace, the UK Defence Secretary. So he says Ukraine has successfully used Storm Shadow missiles provided by the UK. British Defence Secretary says, all I can confirm is it's been used successfully, and I'm pleased it is helping them to defend their country, Wallace said in an exclusive interview. So we know that they've been used in Luhansk. In fact, I think yesterday there was another big explosion in Luhansk that indicates that Storm Shadow has been used and is being used successfully. Good news, because UK might have given up to up to 1,000, maybe 700. Could well be a lot fewer, a lot less than that. But I guess it's going to be about how many sorties, how many planes are fixed up with the ability to send these out, and how many sorties they can fly. Rather than the number of missiles that they have, would be my guess as to what's restricting Ukraine's ability to deliver these Storm Shadows more frequently. Also, new Norwegian donation in close cooperation with the UK. I wonder whether it's the UK stumping up the money as opposed to the kit, because we got bare empty warehouses. New Norwegian donation with the UK: 8 MLRS multiple launch rocket systems, 3 Arthur counter battery radars. As I read the press release, 8 Norwegian mothballed M270s are going to the UK to enable them to donate from their stocks to Ukraine. So whether it's the UK are going to fix them up to the state that they need to be in, or what, I'm not sure what the UK has to do with that, but that's great stuff going on there. And of course, counter battery radars are super important, and there'll be an attrition of stuff like this consistently throughout the war. So even though these are high value bits of kit, there'll need to be a constant supply of them. Joseph Borrell, head of the EU diplomacy, not sure that's his official title, has proposed a significant addition of $3.5 billion to the EU fund used to fund military aid to Ukraine. So again, this is all good news. Ukraine seem to have, there's still the political will to continue supporting Ukraine, I guess is what I'm saying. And maybe actually this is the third big piece of news. Exclusive. Pentagon accounting error overvalued Ukraine weapons aid by $3 billion. This might sound weird, like, oh my goodness, I found £2 down the back of the sofa. I found $3 billion in a cabinet in the Pentagon. That's not how it happens. But I've talked to you ad infinitum, ad nauseum, about how difficult it is to value the aid that is given, because this stuff. So the US and any nation will give your replacement value for a bit of kit. It might be, we're going to give 10 M113s. They're worth this much if we're going to build them new, so that's how much it is, and we're going to give that. But it's not like that's the amount of money they're getting out of bank and throwing at Ukraine. That's just the value that they put on top of those. Those have been bought and paid for and are sitting in a warehouse. They ain't costing squat, right? In fact, they're probably costing the US to keep them in a warehouse, right, and to maintain them or whatever. So they're giving them to Ukraine, putting a value on that. But it's not like that's what the US is spending. And so you have all these different ideas, and then there's replacement. Are we going to buy something in? Was that already accounted for in our replacement schedule? So we're only giving the M113s because we've already replacing them with something newer, and that was already accounted for and paid for in our reschedule, in our schedule that we had set out, going to 2030 and beyond. So it's not like we're having to find extra money. This is just all part of what. But how do you evaluate that in terms of the dollar expenditure? And so they've obviously looked at a whole bunch of this kind of stuff, I assume, and then found that actually there's another 3 billion that arguably, some are hoping that that's 3 billion that they can then spend extra on equipment for Ukraine. So anyway, I'll have a look at this and maybe go into a little bit more depth in an extra. But here is another 3 billion from the US for potentially for Ukraine military aid. Right, moving on to geopolitical stuff. Moldova is no longer reliant on Russian gas. This is huge. Moldova's in the Russian sphere of influence. It is trying to move towards, in fact, there's talk about it really wanting to be part of the EU. That's what most of the Moldovans themselves want. You have Transnistria, which is this annexed region to the east of it, rather like the Donbass for Ukraine that Russia has about 1,500 troops in. And there's all sorts of power plays going on between pro-Russians and Russia, and Moldovan pro-EU, pro-Western citizens and politicians in Moldova. But one of its things that it's been so successful in doing is going from 100% reliance on Russian energy to 0% reliance, and that is astonishing in a year. Moldovan Prime Minister Dorin Rusian reported at a security forum in Bucharest yesterday that Moldova has severed its dependence on Russian gas. I'm not sure about oil. I heard gas and electricity. Oil, I don't know if they still get some, but anyway, whatever the actual reality is, it's a hugely significant move. And talking about gas, more bad news for Russia. So Russia were really hoping that cutting off supply to Europe would then raise the prices of gas as supply was cut, demand stays the same, therefore the price rises. But more bad news for Russia. The price of natural gas in the EU, Amsterdam, has reached another low point today for the first time in almost 2 years. It went under 30 euros per megawatt hours, currently at 29.8 euros per megawatt hour. What an epic disaster for Moscow. So Moscow were relying on this. So if you look, this is 2022, and there was a huge spike here as we came towards the winter time. People were trying to stock up, get their stocks up, and the prices hit a record high then. But since then, broadly, they've gone down to really relatively low prices, and that is can only be a benefit for Europe and a real kick in the shins for Moscow and Putin. The EU does not plan to include Rosatom in the 11th package of sanctions, CNN reports. So there's been this desire to try and sanction the atomic energy organization in Russia. But the problem is they provide really essential services for lots of countries in the EU, for example, and Turkey, where they are doing any number of things from building and entire nuclear power stations to dealing with their waste to servicing the stations, and there aren't that many organizations that can do that kind of work, so it's quite difficult to say, right, we're sanctioning Rosatom, jog on, you're out of Europe, you're out of Turkey or whatever. Not that Turkey would necessarily adhere to this anyway. And then you go, okay, brilliant, now we've got a nuclear power station that's just I don't know what it's doing, because they were running it and now they've gone. So that's pretty dangerous, right? There needs to be some kind of clear strategy for replacing those services with EU or allied services, organizations that can do that kind of work. And that's quite bespoke work when they are the ones who've often built those facilities as well. So they're not going to be included in the next round of sanctions, and you can understand why, although it's a shame, because obviously that's providing quite a lot of money and power and influence to Russia. Okay, the UK has imposed additional sanctions against Russia. The list includes 86 individuals and companies, in particular Rosbank and Tinkoff Bank, 9 organizations associated with Rosatom. So they're interesting. So not being able to hit Rosatom itself, but some of the organizations around the edges. And the founder of the Russian copper company, Igor Altushkin. Now, Britain has also declared an embargo on imports of diamonds, copper, aluminium, and nickel from Russia. So again, hitting hitting Russia hard. Now, with those, obviously, some of these things aren't made everywhere. Some of these ores aren't to be found around the world in great quantity. So the question is, how does that affect global pricing? How does that affect supply? And it's not all the time that these kind of sanctions work in hitting Russia. They're able to sell elsewhere, as we've seen with oil and gas. But these kind of supply lines are much more difficult to just quickly change. So that's the case with oil and gas. I don't know whether things like diamonds, copper, aluminium, and nickel, if the UK say, right, we are sanctioning that, we're not going to buy that, and there's an embargo, I don't know how much that affects Russia going forward. And with regard to alternative sources for that, will it push prices up? And will Russia, in some way, still possibly even benefit from that? I don't know. I don't know enough about that. Okay, G7 leaders will discuss. So G7 are meeting today in Hiroshima. May the 19th to the 21st. So that is Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, Great Britain, USA, and the EU as well. And I do believe Zelensky is going to make an appearance too. Fantastic that he's still able to gain access to these hugely important leaders, to be able to uh, have an effect on the outcome of this war, politically speaking. He's still doing an incredibly important job of being a statesman. I wrote an article yesterday, should be out today, and sorry for those who love him, but it's on Elon Musk and Errol Musk, actually, his dad, and the dad's comments that I showed you on video yesterday, and the idea that you still got this, and he's just spouting pro-Russian, well, just Kremlin talking points. It's like he said it's extremely odd that you've got a comedian who's president. It's like, what about Ronald Reagan? He was an entertainer. Was that incredible? Was that extremely odd? Does that invalidate you from being a politician? Zelensky was a Time Person of the Year 2022. I didn't see Errol bloody Musk being that. So it's just that's a Russian talking point to devalue Zelensky on account of that he was once a comedian. So what? Who gives a monkeys? It's what he does now, and what his achievements are now, and he will go down in history as one of the most effective politicians of the 21st century, without a doubt. Hugely impressive, hugely one of the hardest working men in politics. Look at what he's doing now. He's going all over the world to try and ingratiate himself with the powerful nations and the less powerful nations, anyone and everyone, to try and negotiate himself or to try and influence these leaders into helping Ukraine for the benefit of Ukraine. He's an incredibly impressive leader. And the only reason you would say stuff like that is because you're sucking up Russian narrative. And the only reason you would say that is because actually you're aligned to that kind of thinking, which is deeply problematic, deeply so. So, yeah, I've got an article on that coming out. As you can see, I'm starting to rant now. Okay, lastly, Germany's largest opposition leader, the union CDU, CSU, demands the PMC Wagner, so the Wagner private military company, to be put on the EU's terror list. The union will bring in the notion into the German parliament next week, demanding from the German government to follow up. So there are governments that are doing this, different governments around the world. Is it the UK and French government have done this? French have obviously got a vested interest in this because Wagner are causing them problems in Africa, where the French have got quite a bit of influence. Yeah, this needs to happen. There needs to be as many ways of curtailing Wagner's ability to conduct themselves internationally and in Ukraine. As many ways to stop that from happening as possible, and yeah, get that done for sure. Anyway, that's today's news. Thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, and share. Toodle pips. I'll speak to you later.